now. Okay. Wait, can someone say something really fast?
Check, 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 check.
Okay, cool. Yes, we're streaming. We're live again. Okay. I sorry about that, everyone. Um. Okay. Is this? Oh, and I need to stream. Okay, I'm gonna share my notes if anyone wants to look at them. They're shared here and over here on OBS. Um, I need to add another thingy. Um, okay. So there's this and this. Okay. Sorry, these windows are all messed up. Okay. Okay, that's super weird. Okay, OBS is being really glitchy. Dang it. Well, that's a bummer. Okay, we'll just have to keep going. Whatever. Okay, so we're talking about. Oh, I was talking about Abdullah Ashlan. So a lot of his ideas um, inspired this liberation movement. And the liberation movement is built on women's liberation, ecology, and radical democracy. So it sounds really great. I was hoping to learn a bit more about the liberation movement. Um, but yeah, so the book starts talking about social ecology, which is I think where Tovio left off, of like wanting to talk about like I agree with the conclusions that the book makes, where it talks about like like what's this moving from a free and ecological coexistence in nature society with mutual respect, solidarity, and care towards a society based on hierarchies, classes, and domination. People alienated themselves not only from each other but also from nature. Like I just like agree with like the conclusions of like um getting to a point where humans can either get back to natural society or continue that relationship. And that's like the conclusions it makes, but like how it gets there kind of bothers me. And yeah, Tove, if you want to like talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I'm trying to understand this book maybe from the audience it's intended for, right? Like saying, "Hey, uh, hey there, kids. I'm just like you. I believe in universalist principles and stuff like that, and maybe we can all hang out." I'm not sure if that's what's going on, but like, yeah, the references to just like those Western constructions, it's like that's also what kind of bothers me about the social ecology space in general, right? Because it doesn't necessarily think in a pluralism. It just tells this story of like, oh well, humans were hunter gatherers and lived in harmony with nature, and then they became agriculturalists, and it wasn't as bad yet, but that's when all the problems started, and da 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 da. And I think that story is just I think that's just ahistorical at this point. And it also like leads to like some really faulty constructions down the road. Like a lot of people who are more in that vein of like, hey, what if all the humans died out? That would be great, right? Because then, we could all be natural again. It's like, yeah, that's not great. But like they're building that from the place of like humans used to be great in their relationship with nature and now we're not. Um, and I just think like, yeah, we want to have a really healthy social ecology, but like if you root that in the premise that uh, we all used to do this sort of one way and it used to be great, and
Yeah.
then these sets of things happened, um,
Mm.
I think I don't know. It just it 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 rubs me the wrong way, and not just a little bit, like a lot. And I don't know. In a piece of propaganda, I would hope for more pluralism in the historical like construction of reality that they're going for, because literally currently they're confederalist, right? Like, or they're like a confederation of different groups to allow
Hmm.
for a pluralist way of being with a revolutionary identity, you would think that there would be a historical perspective that undergirds that as well. But that's saying a lot. Sorry, I just said a whole lot. But that's my issue is with the universalism in it.
No, I mean that's kind of my frustration too. It's like I would have really liked to see like a maybe like just like an outlining of history, and then it's kind of just like makes like these really like these really broad claims. Like this isn't one that's so bad, but it's just like says human beings alone are able to intervene to change the course of the natural world through technology and innovation. The question whether they will do it rationally in the service of ever greater freedom or destructively. And it's just like there's just like certain claims where like I'm not so sure that that's true. Like these are like broad sweeping claims about humans and human nature. And I would have really just
Yeah.
liked to read like just something a bit more historic. Like this is what has happened historically. Here's like
Yeah.
an outline or mapping of that. And then also it's just I think I don't know, like we got into this conversation, funny enough, at an anime convention with this random person about like what was it called? That book that you don't like, Tovio, Sapiens.
Sapiens, yeah,
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 like it's just
yeah.
like
I'll hold my tongue.
oh, you don't have to hold your tongue. It's just like there's just like all these like just broad claims about human nature that are from a Western framework of like well that's kind of like a timeline that a lot of European people went through. That's not like everyone else's timeline. And yeah, I'd like to just hear the actual timeline of like what's going on for people, I guess.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And I even have like some different critiques of that are in a similar vein. Um, and it did make me think like this seems like a call out from like a very specific group, like within that like struggle. Maybe like a lot of like, that we're fully aware, at least, it's common knowledge that there's a lot of like Western volunteer fighters that went down there.
Yeah.
I'm assuming a bit of that had a major influence in this book. And I mean, it would, because it's also interesting because I mean, the one particular statement that stood out to me that I kind of was like, back here a little, because they were talking about like, oh, the alienation of capitalism, which is severe and true and all that shit. But then they're all like, yeah, and your cities are just like these crock pots of like intense alienation and no one like kicks. I was like,
Yeah.
no, it's not true. Like from all the times that I've worked in New York City and in Tijuana and fucking like other, massive kind of city hubs, like there are large enclaves of cultures that are extremely fucking tight and work well with each other and like are these kind of vibrant forms of rebellion and cohesive communities. And I just felt like it kind of just shit all over that. But I kind of understand it. Kind of like a part of me wants to give some levity because it's like if this is written from like the mountain people's perspective and they have no knowledge of that, they can only assume based on what the Westerners are telling them. Then okay, fine, but I don't know.
It's like yeah, I would like to know who. Oh, sorry.
No, I mean, and then my other thing was just like, yeah, and it does feel a little ahistorical. It feels kind of like a call out without context.
Yeah, I was like, I was reading on their website, and it was like saying like we don't like we're here to like work hand in hand with the Rojava, and so I get the sense that it's not necessarily the voice of people who are Kurdish necessarily, besides like the quotes of like Ashlan, but it sounds like people who are like in earnest trying to support them, but are maybe those aren't the people writing the books, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like comparing it to the book The Democratic Confederalism by Abdullah Abjan, the first thing you'll notice is that like he's only interested in sharing the story of the Kurdish people, like, and his modern political philosophy is rooted in his own personal history of being Kurdish. He doesn't bother talking about like the world or the people at large, because he talks about like the history of the matriarchal society of the Kurdish people and how they've gotten fucked over by their neighbors a shit ton, you know, and like through that you can kind of understand like like the specific modality of history that he's operating within. But again, like because this like has to be some piece of propaganda, I feel like it feels like it has to be universalist. You know, I think it thinks that it's trying to draw more people, but it actually creates more problems, I'm afraid.
Yeah, in terms of effect as a piece of propaganda, it does feel like like elementary in a way. It's
Yeah.
like, well, it's like when you're in fifth grade or something, or sixth grade, and you have Earth history or Earth sciences class, and it's like, well, there was a Big Bang a long time ago, and then the Earth came along. You know,
Right.
like there's this like, okay, that's a severe oversimplification.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting that this isn't necessarily the perspective of the people on the ground, is what it sounds like. Or maybe
Yeah.
it's like an isolated or a constrained perspective to maybe some like Europeans or Americans who are there, who are like writing on behalf. Is that kind of what people are getting at?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it feels
Yeah.
like. Yeah, I mean that's why I mentioned Crime Think earlier, is because it feels very much like you've never heard of any of this stuff before. Let me blow your mind, which again works well, I think, as propaganda, but not as a serious telling of why these people are martyrs. They're putting their lives on the line for something real, and by not engaging with the actual historical material part of it, feels like we're just watching the commercial or the trailer.
Yeah, no, it does feel like a trailer. Chris, what was the book that you like said that you read by Abdullah Ashlan?
Yeah, this one right here, Democratic Confederalism. I highly suggest it, and it's written all by him. So love it or hate it, it's like there's a specificity there, where he talks about his history and the history of his people, and it's just more
Yeah,
engaging.
that's definitely. I was really hoping that's what this book would be. Um, but yeah, it's it's not, and so we're here. And yeah, I don't know. Do you think we should go through, like, they talk about social ecology, and it says social ecology is the science of people's relationships with their natural and social environments. It examines how these relationships are shaped from different perspectives, planning classical scientific disciplines, and including anthropology, philosophy, history, archaeology, and social theory. It is not a purely descriptive theory. Its crucial project is how the critical human nature relationship can be reimagined, transformed. To me, and someone else pointed this out, but it kind of sounds like that's very similar or even the same as like dialectical materialism, um, which I don't know. I'm not sure if that matters, if it's the
Yeah,
same, but
I was kind of thinking that, and I think it at least matters in terms of like the dialectic between like people in the kind of socialist communist space and people in the anarchist space, because often I think they're kind of talking about similar things, but social ecology gets heavily problematized in like the more communist spaces, even though I don't think, I think that might just relate back to Bookchin, but I'm not totally sure on that.
mm,
But yeah, it feels very similar, but yeah, it feels like it focuses kind of on different facets of the same dialogue.
mm.
Mm.
Yeah, just reading, I don't know, just kind of, I don't know if you want to go over any of these parts in social ecology, um, because it's like I agree with a lot of these points. Like, let's see, this one says we must see ourselves as integrated with nature, viewing nature as a realm of potentiality in which human beings represent the apex of nature's long evolution toward ever greater consciousness, subjectivity, creativity, and freedom. I don't know. I agree with these statements. Yeah,
I
I don't know
feel
if any thoughts
critical,
on that.
like I'm critical of the apex part. I remember being kind of annoyed by that. Like, okay, humans as the apex of consciousness sort
Mm-hmm.
of anthropomorphizes like it creates like a single thread, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, there's this idea of development. You know, bacteria aren't very conscious, but humans are, and it's like a thread from bacteria to humans in some way. And I think when I see that, I'm like, I don't think that's helpful, right? Especially
Yeah.
when we have these massive like mycorrhizal networks that exist across, you know, uh, you know, aspen trees that cover, like, multiple square miles of land. And we have these like other things that we don't recognize consciousness in. So I think the idea that humans are the arbiters of potentiality in nature, that actually doesn't, for me, fit into like a modern social ecology. And I wonder if that's really antiquated based on like just old theory. I
Yeah,
wonder about that, but it bothers me a little bit.
I 100% agree. And yeah, it's interesting because I think that that kind of more applies to like Marxist, like I feel like the it feels like a, I mean, I don't know, it either feels like a naive, like weird, like green anarchist take, which I don't know, I feel like those type of people are very like, oh, the trees have feelings, but like, like they can talk to them, but like same time, I mean, we're at a point now where it's pretty evident that most of the creatures around us, a lot of them have some like a capacity for what like human beings in this day and age call like consciousness or like a conscious or like personality. Like I don't know, I just saw a study the other day about like bees and what they do when they're just like left alone and have no when they're literally just have leisure because everything has been done. They just like fuck around and play and like do weird shit together that like there's no reason for them to do besides just like fuck it, like why not, and it's like
Mhm.
you would think something that didn't have a conscience like that would just like sit still until there was an objective, you know what I mean, like and this goes for birds and all all this other shit, but and complexity of mushrooms and that dynamic within trees. I don't want to ramble and shit, but I think more to the point that I want to say is like I think what a valid thing, and one thing I'm kind of upset that they didn't really address in this is like, okay, so social ecology, like, well then what are concrete examples of what that looks like? And they just kind of throw it out there like this is what we aspire to, but there's no like, well, what does that actually look like? Like for me, like federations around watershed basins would have been like a decent answer or example of like,
Mhm.
hey, this might be a good idea, but they didn't even do that. They just kind of threw out like a general uh what's the word, like definition.
Yeah, like mass cultivation, like another example, like mass cultivation in the Amazon of like, you know, huge food garden, not just food gardens, but huge like ecology gardens that have led to some of the most diverse places on Earth, and so much of that is attributable to just human ecology, right? And like that, like there's just that's in evidence. So it's like I wonder when they were writing this if they didn't know about that,
Yeah.
like if they didn't know about like coalitions of native nations in North America building like a massive bison highway that that stretched to the East Coast, from the plains. It's like, did they not know about that stuff? Because it seems like much more common knowledge, at least in leftist spaces, than maybe it was. But maybe it's not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the rest of the book is getting into like Rojava's ecology. Um, but it's kind of just like it's not even like like social ecology. It's really just with ecology in general. Um, which we can like look over that a little bit. I'm just seeing what this is over the next few decades. Tens of millions of people left their homes because of increased droughts. Yeah, well, I'll go over this. So, capitalist modernity. It talks about. Um, there's just like some list of facts about like how messed up capitalism is. Um, which are interesting, but like I guess more specific to Rojava. So I'll just start reading some quotes. It says, until 2012, Rojava was in a colonially dependent relationship with the Syrian Assad regime, which strongly affected the economic environmental situation in the region. So it talks about how like there was deforestation, and they were used to create monocultures, which is mostly wheat and olives. And then for decades, the Kurdish were banned from planting trees or growing vegetable gardens, and they were systemic. And because of this, like lack of like being able to grow their own food, like a lot of jobs went to Syrian cities for cheap labor. Um, the Turkish also have like built dams, and so it's prevented like water flowing for the rivers, which is like reduce their groundwater. Um, they also talk about how monocultures ruin the soil.
Yeah.
Wells
I will
was
say, I mean, it's a phenomenal critique of capitalism. Like, if I'm trying to show someone, like, hey, this is exactly why the reason I don't fuck with this system whatsoever, it's like, boom, there it is. Like, and every, like, and there's so many facets. I really appreciate that part of the book a lot. It's just like, yeah, it's kind of very condensed and,
I honestly thought it was just
propaganda.
I don't know. After reading the Red Deal, I was like that was like one of my like I don't know favorite critiques of. It was like a very also like thin book, but it was like so densely packed with like, and it's like funny because it's never like oh like we need to like have like communism or something, but like that's basically like what they're saying the whole time without, but they're just like critiquing capitalism. But I don't know. This was like so broad in a way that I was kind of just like it was broad enough. I don't know. It was I just wish I had gotten more specifically about Rojava because when it was
Yeah.
saying stuff about capitalism, I was like, yeah, that's really a real thing and that's awful. But I really wanted to learn more about Rojava.
Yeah.
But if you appreciate, I don't want to like dismiss that at all.
Yeah. No,
One
I
thing,
sorry.
yeah, one thing I wanted to say about this, while like hearing y'all talk about this and thinking about like what I was thinking of the book, and I'm gonna be projecting here a little bit, but I'm Trinidadian. My family's Trinidadian, and I remember when I went to Trinidad and trying to learn about the history of stuff there. Um, I would go to the library. I would ask, like, who are the esteemed people that can talk about the indigenous history there, because the history of the culture and the history of the country was that, like, it was an indigenous island, and then the Europeans came through. They imported the Africans as slave labor, and so the indigenous culture is like almost wiped out there, right? And then if you read like the traditional books, the books that I was used to, there is very little about the actual history of indigenous people except for like explicitly anti-indigenous propaganda, but like presented in the sort of way that it's like it doesn't feel like propaganda. It feels like it's a regular history book, if y'all know what I mean by that. And so then I'm like, okay, well, who else can I look up? Who else can I find that's like actually giving the indigenous perspective? And so I'd find these. They were recommended to me. They'd be these authors that like have things that are like, oh, well, what you've been hearing about the indigenous people is not true. And here are some examples of like how they gathered together in cities, and they were like, actually, they were advanced for their time, and it would be like what Lua was saying, like what David was saying, like I'm like, where are the specifics? Where are y'all citations and stuff? And it's like, you kind of like look for it, and it's like, first of all, that doesn't exist to the degree that like I'm used to the degree of like Red Deal and stuff, where it's like this is why I read stuff. This is why I look for stuff is so that you can find like concrete material stuff. And it's like that isn't really there. And then secondly, like where I'm going with this, as far as like where I relate to in this book, and I'm not sure if this is exactly 100% true, but what I'm thinking about is that like in the context of when this was printed and presented to people, it probably wasn't important to have specifics. Like when I'm thinking about like what I heard about like why these books are this way, they're like, we just needed something to combat the like immediate colonial violence that was being like fed to us by Europeans and
Oh.
stuff like that. Like it wasn't particularly important to like have super specific stories, and like maybe those will come later or something like that.
Oh.
But just in terms of like, you know, y'all talking about the effectiveness of the propaganda, it's like sometimes you have to like reposition your mind on like why does this exist and why is it like this.
Mhm.
Hmm. Interesting.
So yeah, that's my little spiel.
Uh, to that effect, is that kind of thinking about who who the audience was, who the intended audience was at that specific time? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, and then you know it survives. So obviously, it's not necessarily a good idea to just be like, oh well, it was fine for this audience, and like you know we're gonna read it too and take it in wholesale or anything like that. But just in terms of thinking about like you know why was it written this way? Because like you know I was reading it thinking the same things of like y'all don't have real perspective on cities. What are you talking about? But then also it would be like if the immediate effect of this is that like because they mention in the book they're like the Turkey is trying to turn itself into like the capitalist state, right?
Right.
And so you just have to like be aware. Well, this is like you know a really bad effect of that that can happen. We don't necessarily need specifics for like you know why we should continue the way that we're living. We just want y'all to know like what's the end point of this, the worst effect, and to like have that understanding and go from there.
I mean, I think their targeted audience is like they want to like promote their school that they have.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. When I think about their audience, yeah, I don't know. Just like looking at their website and then like, but I mean, I could be wrong. It just seems like this whole book is like revolving around like, yeah, like revolving around their school and like promoting like this their particular campaign about Rojava, which like for them like the way that you help out with that is like by going to their school.
Yeah, which is, yeah, I mean, what I'm curious, what are people's thoughts about that? There's a lot of, because that's like the specific, that's the specific take that I got from that book was y'all need to come here, like get the fuck over here.
Yeah.
Um, there's been similar call outs in other parts of the world, but this one in particular is pretty, it's pretty heavy, especially considering the current stakes, everything that's at stake currently for Rojava and the people that live there.
Yeah, I think for me like I'm a bit skeptical about like I don't know when I was just like and like I don't know much about this campaign and stuff. I just remember like I was like reading an article written by them like talking about like how like the way that you help is like becoming to this school, I guess, specifically, which is like I guess I would need to know more about the school. And then also they were saying like, you know, we don't like tell them what to do, like we work hand in hand. But then I also read this article that was saying like the youth are playing too many video games, like the Kurdish youth, and I was kind of just like
Uh-huh.
that just seems like a little bit like telling people what to do and like I don't know. Like to me like when I think about like supporting people where they're at, it's like well, it's like that. It's like supporting people where they're at and not being like, well, you're just doing too much of this or too much of that. Like kind of like letting people decide for themselves like what they need. And so I don't know. I've just kind of have had mixed feelings about that, like in those ways. But I don't think I also know enough to really have a formed opinion because I think also just anytime someone's like this passionate about like supporting people, even if they're not doing it in a way that I think is like perfect or something, like I think it's still really great that they're like we want to support the Rojava and help even if it's like in a way that I don't think is perfect or something.
Mm.
When I
Yeah,
was,
and
at least in the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say real quick, like on that note, it opens with like saying that like, oh well, all these great people are doing all this great on the ground stuff, and like this can be a map for like what we're doing. We intend to like take it elsewhere and everything like that, right? So that's like when I started reading it, I was feeling like you. I was like, you know, I would expect there to be more specifics of things that y'all have already done, and that we can like export somewhere else. But then, like, you know, the more I read it, the more I realized, oh, this, yeah, you're right. This is an advertisement for y'all to come here, help us build stuff, and then we'll take it somewhere else. So that's why it's like so theoretical and broad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, and to a degree, they've been largely successful, at least from what I understand of Rojavan politics and conflict. Currently speaking, I mean, they're still under a huge heel on their neck, but people from all over the world have gone there. Some for like very strange reasons, just
Yeah.
because they just hate Muslims and like, yeah, give me an opportunity to kill Muslims and I'll be there. But like, uh, and then you have like people with genuine you know anti-capitalist perspectives going there, and it's a litany. It's a from what I've heard. I mean, I know people who um fought in Rojava, talked to them personally, and
Oh wow.
um it's it's fucking crazy. I mean, I don't know, like I think from an American perspective, it's actually relatively safe speaking. I mean, like the United States will not try to imprison you for going to fight.
Right.
Yeah, Daesh out there.
Hmm.
But that same thing cannot be said for people from Germany, France,
Hmm.
Italy, just large parts of Europe and shit.
Yeah.
For like Australia, for people that go to Rojava currently and help fight. I mean, because they're considered internationally as terrorists.
Hmm.
The PKK, the YPG,
Yeah.
and I mean, only because we've had a loose alliance with them with the Trump era,
Hmm.
I think the United States are a little bit more lenient, but for the rest of the world, I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if like even Asian countries are pretty strict in regards to international support with for the Kurds. But yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
it's for
I
sure
don't. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say it's for sure something I've thought about. I mean, I got offered like I got offered.
Hmm.
I have someone was like, "Yo, here's some lucrative shit if you want to hop on over there." And because you don't have to be a combatant if you go out there to sport. You can be all kinds of shit. Anything from metal, like just if you have skills in construction,
Hmm.
ecology, or rather like permaculture, medical. But I will say this: they will heavily encourage you to fight, is what I've been told. They're like, oh yeah, that's a nice garden you got there. You got any experience with a rifle? Do you want to learn?
Looks like you're ready for the next step. Fighting.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We like to harvest this plant with a gun. Um, you know,
Yeah.
just every day practice
Mhm.
harvesting this plant with a gun.
Yeah.
Like instead of a bayonet, you have like a trowel.
Yeah. What are the hari, the Japanese garden
Oh
shovel?
yeah. Oh yeah.
The sharpened hari.
Hmm.
I will say I don't know much about um, Rojava, which is I wanted to read this book, but I've heard people because I believe is it the U.S. that supported Rojava?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
people are
in
very
specific
skeptical
campaigns.
of
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, totally.
Oh,
That
it's shitty.
is that is
They,
a
I
crit.
mean,
Go ahead.
no, I mean, the little thing I say was basically we supported them for a long time, and in a point of where they needed a lot of our support, the Trump administration was like, "Ah, we're done. Fuck off. Don't care."
Yeah,
And
Mm.
so we no longer support them.
yeah.
Okay.
Like dropped them in a really precarious, fucked up way. Like they incurred a lot of violence once the U.S. was no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they feel pretty betrayed by it. And I've also heard fucking U.S. soldiers themselves be like, "It was awesome working with these people. Why did we stop?" Like U.S. soldiers, like a lot of them developed solidarity with what was going on over there, and then it was just like, "Nope, we're gone."
Wow.
So yeah, I mean that would be a huge critique when we're talking about Rojava is they're working with the United States, which certain Marxists for very good reasons would not be chill with the CIA handing the Rojava weapons, which they did. So that is something that makes them imperfect, and something to talk about.
But
You
I
know,
mean, I also think if you're like fighting for liberation, you got to take whatever resources you can.
that's my
So it's
take. That's
just
what I
like,
think. That's personally what I think. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel
That's
like
and that's
people don't
true.
have like a place to judge. Like, I don't know,
Right.
unless like you're in that
Hmm.
position where you're like,
Right.
I mean, and if you do any history into like Middle Eastern conflicts, you will quickly come to an understanding of it, just how messy it gets, and how like just nothing is ever clean cut. Like
Hmm.
within the span of like middle, and this is not just Middle Eastern conflicts, but generally, like it's a good example of what like I don't know, just what war, the dynamics that war creates, civil war and otherwise, can be very interesting because like the enemy that you're fighting this week might by chance be your fucking allies in the following month because you're dealing with a bigger threat. And that's actually quite common in situations like that. And it's just weird, and it's a lot of people have to make a lot of concessions. And it's crazy because like you're allies with somebody who's like great allies with your greatest enemies, and you're just like fucking why are you? But we can't because like there's just a lot. Nothing is ever clear cut, especially in the Middle East and other
Hmm.
places like Southeast Asia and even Latin
Yeah.
America to a certain extent.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, like Yugoslavia and Albania or Kosovo, right? Like it's a
Hmm.
similar thing. And all these places, like I feel like we don't, how do I say this? We don't get good networks of ideas around what happens there because in the US and the West in general, like somebody gets propagandized as like the good guys and someone is the bad guys. And
Hmm.
it's almost universally more complex than that, right?
Yeah.
And you know, the only bad guys at the end of the day are the imperial core, I
Hmm.
think, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and the imperial core is often helping people who I guess I feel sympathetic with, and then they're not helping them at
Yeah.
because they're at the end of the day they're always going to be the enemy. But
Hmm.
like if you're on the ground and fighting and you are getting massacred by multiple enemies, right, or by
Right.
multiple people who just don't even see you as human, like the
Yeah.
Kurds have experienced, shoot,
Yeah.
you're going to take that help wherever it comes, right? Like
Totally.
you don't have much of a choice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know where the impulse to have this sort of purity around history comes from, but I find certain of like my Marxist Leninist comrades just having this very cut and dry black and white view of history that doesn't vibe with the way I've studied history, you
Mhm.
know.
yeah. Well, I think we can talk about for the rest of the book. It just kind of gives. It just talks about like ecology. So it talks like here it mentions like agroforestry, the combination of agriculture and forestry, and in this is like the remedy for monoculture. It kind of like talks about how we can remedy these ecological issues that it previously brought up. It talks about gray water, using gray water and using black water for compost, and yeah, I don't know if you all want to talk about that a little bit more. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. I think one thing like when I read that section, I was like, oh, all that stuff's really cool. Like I really hope that the world can do these things, like that the world can have agroforest, that the world can use gray water and black water instead of just like use wasting all this water. Like these are all things that we have an imperative that we're gonna have to think about, um, because the world's getting to the point where we can't keep on consuming this much water. So, yeah, I don't know if you all want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, I like that shit. I'm a big fan of permaculture and
Mm-hmm.
indigenous practices I like. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, well, I like it. I don't know if I have much more to say than like, yeah, let's do that. Like,
Right. Yeah, it was cool the way they were talking so much about gray water and black water and recuperating the nutrients in urine, like things like that. I love. Like there's a long history with that, and like people don't talk about how much you can use gray and black water and human waste, literal human waste, to like produce, a few months down or a few years down the road, like something useful, you know.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
exciting. I'm like, oh my gosh, like something like our poop can be used
Yeah,
for fertilizer,
so
which is
cool,
like,
so
what
cool.
poop kind of naturally is.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very exciting. It's like, yeah, like we could make this like really cool world where it's sustainable, like everything is it's an ecosystem in itself. And I don't know, that's very exciting to me. I would like to figure out how to do that. Like we have like a garden and it's like, I don't know, we garden and I'm like, I feel like it could be so much more, but I don't really know
Yeah.
how. Like I read stuff about this, about like permaculture, and I'm like, oh, like I would like to get on that level one day. Um,
Yeah. It's, I will say it's not as inaccessible. Well, I mean, I don't think anyone said it's inaccessible, but I mean, there's a, you know, pretty decent global movement right now revolving around permaculture, and it is problematic because it's doesn't really give its dues to indigeneity culture and where
No.
a lot of that information came from. It's a lot
Yeah.
of white people that have had their shit to be either called out or still like are being called out for appropriating shit that, they just whatever.
Whoa, I
For making
found
it.
Yeah.
out that these plants don't need to be watered, and I figured that out.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Um, but I mean, it's like an ongoing process, and there's like, it's always like a wrestling match, for lack of better words, and like, but it's still like generally speaking going in a positive direction. Like here, I mean, just like any city you're at, like you can find a kind of permaculture organization, and luckily, like the city that I live in, and a bunch of cities that I've visited from Oakland to New York City. When I was living in New York City, I was working at a permaculture farm um, in the city in Brooklyn for like brown people within Bushwick, and and I've seen quite a bit of those. So it's actually a badass place to to like meet other people of color because generally they're on the same tip in regards to like anti-colonial practices and have a very strong distaste for like capitalism. Um, and you know, yeah, and I mean, I wish I still did it as much as I did back then. I don't do it anymore, but like I, yeah, man, like it's a great experience. Even like, I mean, I guess I'm gonna do like a shout out to an organization that I used to work for, which was Olseri, Oglala Lakota Economic Revitalization Institute. They used to do a lot of these like permaculture workshops where they would invite people from all over the world. You'd pay $100 if you were a person of color. It was sliding scale, or if you were there to work, like really, really work, you get in for free. Um, and I mean, they since COVID, they've had a rocky. They're not really as like prolific as they were before COVID, but I'm keeping an eye on them and see if they kind of restart functions. But for me, I thoroughly recommend getting involved in permaculture movement to one degree or another, even if it's just like volunteering every once in a while.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds awesome.
And one of the things that I was thinking about through a lot of that is that like or where I spent a good part of my childhood in Michigan, there were already like state level, not quite. How do I say this? Because like, where's the line between permaculture and like something that's industrial, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think in some places where you have delicate ecosystems where people have had, if you're going to be agricultural in Michigan, you have to be in relationship to the ecosystems there,
Yeah.
to for the large part. And you have a lot of smaller farmers and things like that. And so, if you go to waste reclamation plants and things like that, those are also, um, you know, developed technologies in a permaculture vein. And so you do have like black water and gray water systems that are integrated into rural communities. Um, but you have less and less of that now because a lot of that's been deconstructed in favor of these huge industrial agricultural projects, right? Or like,
Mm-hmm.
instead of reclaiming water, we're Nestle and we're gonna pull all the water out of Mecosta County and drop the water table down so that like local farmers have to buy water from Nestle in order to water their crops now.
Ah,
But like,
just to sell it back to them.
uh-huh.
exactly, just to sell it back to
Mhm.
them. That's exactly what they've done, what they're doing. And but it's interesting because like a place that's so water rich, you kind of have a rich tradition of these more integrated ecological practices, but a lot of that's fallen by the wayside in the last 15 years or so, which is incredibly tragic. But like the scale of that kind of technology, that integrated with sort of like a localized, like a more individualized and localized permaculture approach, I think is also super promising, right? And I don't know, like I hope those technologies don't fall by the wayside too much, right? Because they're there and they've been really effective, I think, through like the 70s and 80s and a good part of the 90s before all that stuff got gutted.
I also kind of want to say, I don't know, this might be weird, but like, also like fascists are really into permaculture,
Right.
and
Yeah, like
kind
what's up with that?
Yep.
Yeah,
Totally
They're also
true.
into Lord of the
Yeah.
what
Rings.
is up with that?
same way they're into
Yeah.
like kibbutzes and shit. The same way they're into
Yeah.
like communes and stuff. It's like there's a
Yep.
value to that.
Volkish. It's Volkish is what they call it. It's like reclaiming the Aryan homeland. It's cotton core. It's cottage core. Sorry, cottage core.
Yo,
Cottage
hey,
core.
back off cottagecore.
It's Volk
Oh,
Punk.
sorry.
Volk Punk. Sorry. TM.
No, but I mean,
Oh, solar
like,
punk. Oh,
there's intrinsic value there that cannot be denied, even by fucking
right.
fascists who
Totally.
fucking love capitalism and love imperialism and love alienating people. Like they even
Yeah.
can't deny that shit. But
Right.
what's crazy though is the hyper capitalists. The only people who really, really deny that shit are the fucking corporate, the landlords, the corporate fuckheads, the people who really can stand to profit a lot from alienating people
From the current system.
They need to be stuck on their system.
Right.
And that's why it's illegal here in the United States. I'm not sure about other parts of the world, but here in the United States, a lot of permaculture practices are illegal.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah. Or a significant amount. Yeah.
Shit, I didn't know that.
Mm.
This is kind of why, like, even though I totally hear and mostly agree with y'all's like problems with the humans are the apex thing that they had going on in the book, it's like from a certain angle that's also incredibly useful is just that, like, projecting again a little bit, speaking from experience in Trinidad, like it's real huge to just like take pride in being able to figure out how to manipulate systems so that you can get the best thing. And if you can get like people in a state where it's like the best human isn't necessarily the one who makes the most money, like, if you want to think about yourself as the best human, then it's like whoever can contribute the most to the earth, that makes you the best. And like people take pride in that. So like, just getting people in a state of mind where it's like, okay, well, we don't have to change your mind about like, the sort of messed up way that you view hierarchy and all of that, but just like put it to good use.
Yeah, like optimizing caretaking and curation and societal contribution as opposed to like raw profit. Like,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I feel like we covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover in the book. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to go over?
Go ahead, David.
No, you first.
Okay. I felt that the framing of capitalist modernity, I find that a bit of a red flag. I kind of am against that sort of Nietzschean kind of like, I hate modernity, like modernity equals evil. It kind of buys into this like linear view of time that I just I don't know, as an anarchist, I feel like we have to like
Wait.
stop doing this like what?
When does Nietzsche talk about modernity being evil? I just might not have read that, but
It's just Nietzsche. His whole thing is like, is that like that like what was it? He's against modernity because modernity is this like thing that's coming to get him. Like we like from his perspective, we need like these strong men to like maintain tradition against the vile hordes of
wow, that
modernity.
sounds so fashy.
Yeah, he is.
I
I mean,
fucking hate.
yeah,
Sorry, I
his
just hate
politics
DJ. I
are
just always hear him say like the shittiest things. People are like, I love DJ.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. That his politics are
Everything
extremely
worse than a
fascist.
Jew is a Nazi.
Wait, what'd you say, dude? I missed that.
He's just he's like this anti-fascist fascist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Anyways, I didn't mean to derail it. So you were saying like you're like sick of modernity, but
oh,
like
just,
not in the way that
oh,
Nietzsche is or something. I'm sorry, I derailed
no,
that.
no. I just, what am I trying to say? Like, I don't like the framing of like we are in a modern era that we have to that is bad, quote unquote, and then there was a before time that was good. And I think once you start bringing in concepts of modernity, it's almost as if you're telling the people, "Don't worry, we can put the toothpaste back in the tube." Like time, we can pretend time didn't happen. Once you start talking about I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is framing our present time as anything other than being full of potential, which is what I believe. You know, I believe that there's nothing inherently wrong with our current time. Like I don't, our modern era is just like any other era, and to highlight that a modern era is something we have to remove ourselves from, I think produces again more problems than it fixes.
Yeah, I like to that point, like I was just watching a lecture from Ramose who like wrote kind of like the main work on Ubuntu ethics, and he like really chastises the use of modernity and postmodernity, specifically postmodernity, because he's like, well, why do we frame things in a postmodern context? It's in part to remove us from a relationship to the material world. Like we if we tie everything into a material foundation, then we can have everything from existential thought to any kind of abstract thought can exist in relationship with material thought. And one of his main things was like postmodernity was defined in part to scrub the history of colonization and enslavement of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the West. And so like all these people could imagine, well, now we're in the postmodern age, but the postmodern age has colonization and enslavement of
Mm-hmm.
people. So like what, if even if that's part of the intent, it's like, well, the material reality is people are still continue to be in these really messed up situations. But yeah, I'll try to I'll track down that lecture and link it in the channel, because I think it's just so good. He's so
Nice.
cool. I'm, yeah,
Yeah, I want to check
yeah,
him out. It seems fucking awesome. And from the little that I've gathered, it seems dope as fuck.
yeah.
At least for me, I know. So I know this book didn't really get into much of like Rojavan culture and or like economic practices and um just the general socioeconomic situation. But I was wondering if anyone had any specific inputs that they do really appreciate about the Rojavan culture that or situation that was not really expressed in this book or as of yet.
I mean, I don't know much about Rojava, but I just think it's like amazing that they're like out here like liberating themselves. It's just like they're really doing it, and well, that's why I was so interested in them. I was like, oh, I don't know, I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, same. I to be like super 100% honest, I was like surprised that you were like, oh, I know some people who were over there, and I was like, oh, dope, because I have no knowledge of this.
Mm.
Yeah. Like I know somebody who went to be a medic, and like it was wild. Like I think just the symbol of being able to help to be part of and help in a liberation movement is super inspiring to people.
Yeah.
And like I watched this person in a period of like a year learn language, get a bunch of like medic certifications, and and left, and just bounced, right? And that was, yeah, I don't know. Like, if something's gonna be a symbol, I probably need to learn a lot more about it, you know. Um, so yeah, but the histories are really hard in this, given how much displacement and disruption has happened.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, at least, I mean, I'm not as learned as the word I feel I should be is what. But I mean, I know a decent amount of it. I want to know more still. Um, but like I don't know, some of my favorite elements of like the Rojavan struggle. I mean, for one, is um like the feminist angle is like not one to be kind of skirted because it's like commonly found amongst communist struggles. Um, it's like specifically inspiring coming from Rojava, considering their region and the area that they're occupied, like, or rather not occupied, they were from, they're rooted in, rather.
Yeah.
And, on all fronts, they are, not just like, pressed by patriarchal societies, but some of the more like severely patriarchal societies, and influences thereof. And they still deal with it within their own culture. They still deal with like patriarchal elements within their culture. I mean, they're largely a matriarchal society, but the patriarchal Muslim influence from Iraq, Syria, and just Turkey, everywhere, like it's still an issue, or it's still something they have to deal with to a certain degree. And like that struggle is very interesting. Um, their struggles with refugees is also very interesting because even though they have very limited resources to offer, they're also a refugee hub from people escaping elements of ISIS, ISIL, and otherwise.
Yeah.
Um, and they are, I say, more so than any other like culture. This might be wrong, but as of where I stand now, more so than any other culture, they've had to really confront their revolutionary ideals, considering that they're in an extremely like multicultural area. Because when you compare it to the similar struggle, let's say like the Zapatista struggle in southern Chiapas, that's like a largely indigenous area with
Right.
very little like European influence. The way that it exists in other parts of Mexico.
Yeah.
Like Chevron is another example, but like it's kind of like a monogamous culture. Not That's not the right word, but it's largely like a unified culture around like an indigenous identity. Even though there's several different indigenous cultures or different indigenous clans or tribes or caracoles, like they still come together under the same banner largely of just like indigeneity, even they have different languages and whatnot. Um, they have like a unique enough culture, but the thing about Rojava is that they're dealing with several different countries. It's not just one country. It's not just Mexico.
Right.
it's it's five different countries, and then that's not even like considering the United States influence and the UN and Australia and whoever the fuck else is going there. But like within that war torn situation, I still stand by that more so than any other situation. They've had to confront their revolutionary ideals and be like, wow, what the fuck do we do when we have suicide bombers in amongst our midst? What the fuck do we do when we are against putting people in cages, but right now we have no other option? Like,
Totally.
person's
Right.
gonna murder people. This person, their husband is a martyr on the opposite side of the fucking field of the battle, and this wife who we don't want to kill, his wife and children who we don't want to kill, or have this absolute vendetta, and will stop at nothing trying to kill us. And now we have to keep a prisoner of war.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fucking nuts, and that's just like scratching the surface.
Uh-huh. Right. Like the you wouldn't even say prison system, just like the like holding of so much Daesh people that like are that want to fuck you up, you know, while simultaneously, yeah, trying to, yeah, it's like, what do you do? You're confronting a lot of realities. I mean, I think that, and again, unfortunately, we weren't, reading much of like Ajlan's words other than, you know, a few quotes, unfortunately. And I think that like he talks about uh, the even the dangers of the dangers of homogeneity of state, even within the region of where the Kurdish people live. Like even calling it Kurdistan would erase the massive amount of Turkmen people from Turkmenistan that live there. That's a tiny example, but it's just like it's too much of a mosaic of multiple cultures to even try to develop a state singular identity, which is for me, what I find so incredibly inspiring by the Rojava project in its entirety is its formulation of affinity groups and its direct democracy communication structure that is basically like a hub of 4 or 5 families being able to talk about their needs and their concerns and being able to have a line of communication throughout the entire Rojava project. Like I find that like an affinity groups system of a bunch of bubbles where there's still hierarchy, right? There's still like what you might call a popular front, which would simply just be your protection groups, but still like that kind of direct democracy I've never seen in my life. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, that's why I think Rojava within all of their problems is still deeply inspiring.
All right. Well, that seems like a good stopping point for book club. Yeah,
Thank y'all for sharing all that.
huh?
I was just saying thank y'all for sharing all that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks for
I want to talk a little bit about the next books to read potentially. Um, I kind of need a banger if I'm being 100. So if we could just put books that are like guaranteed
Yeah.
bangers on the list. One book that I've been wanting to read it for a bit is Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
That's what I was gonna say.
It's
I was gonna say,
classic.
let's read that. I
Okay.
love it.
I'm gonna put that on the list. I also put the Democratic Confederalism by Ashlan on there. I spelled his name wrong, but like
I
I'll
do
fix
want
it
to read
later.
that. I haven't read that one in its entirety, so hopefully sometime down in the future that'll be more recent. But I could
Yeah.
just read it myself.
Yeah, if we don't read it now, I might just read it anyways because it's kind of like a nice segue since we just read Make Rojava Green again. Does anyone else have any suggestions?
I read what I like by Steve Biko.
What's it called again?
I I read what I like by Steve Biko. Are you writing these down in
Yeah.
the chat? I'll write it in the
No.
chat.
Oh. Okay, let me. I'm writing it down on this Google Docs. Let me make another
Oh,
document.
maybe it's called I write what I like. Wait, let me just double
I
check.
Write What I Like by Steve Biko, Biko.
Okay, yeah, it's I write what I like. Thanks.
I write what I like. Okay, I'm making Google Docs and I'll share it right now with everyone. And but yeah, people can put stuff on there. I just like talking about it right now because I want to know what these books are about. Oh, Pedagogy of Press, for anyone who doesn't know, it's like um I don't know. It's just I'm not
Powerful,
gonna
yeah.
describe it very well. I was about to be like, oh, it's just like about this about oppressed people, about like how oppression works and stuff. But that sounds underwhelming. But I hear all these quotes from it, and all the quotes are bangers.
Yeah.
And apparently, every line's
Uh-huh.
a quotable line that's a
It's
banger. So
from my reading
Yeah,
of
it
it,
is so dense. Oh, wait, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say from my reading of it 10 years ago is more about it gets to the crux of like community-based education um, in regards to dealing with oppression, the forces of the state, whatever you want to call it. Like, but it's about how to connect with people wholly different from you or who have. I mean, there's large chapters of it that are about like, you know, how do you bridge these gaps um, amongst oppressed people when, you know, because Paulo Freire was an academic and he went out to like communities in Brazil, indigenous or otherwise, trying to formulate struggles that can further, you know, can generate equity for these communities and all the struggles therein. And it was kind of more of an exploration of that, but also just you know, it's like also loosely a critique of like the education system that we know in the modern world and modernity or whatever the fuck you want to call it. um, it's kind of a lot, but yeah, that's what I remember from my reading.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm very
Yeah,
excited.
I would add to that. It's like if you're reading other contemporaneous works or work like by African socialists or really anyone in the world after that was published, they everyone references the language in that book, and like I think it constructs semantics for people to use, and it really puts on its head the colonial education system, like was just said, like yeah, like you just start seeing it in everything, which I think is like for me at least the power, like a great power of that book. I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone has read this book. Like you really kind of see it.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also, you said I write what I like. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Um, so I think I've read portions of things, like snippets of things by Biko, but like Biko's one of those he kind of sits alongside Fanon as a psychologist, sort of writing about psychology of colonized people. Also, he was killed by the South African government. There's a movie about him where they called Cry Freedom, where they basically scrubbed out that he was a socialist, right? Like when that's a huge part of the identities of a lot of writers from that period of time. Like he was in some kind of dialogue with Fanon, but yeah, just he was an amazing person, and I want to read more by him. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of why I was throwing that out there.
Okay. Anything
I
else?
think it's shorter too.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that anyone wants to put on the list? And we can add stuff later, but just anything else for now. Okay. I kind of like that it's short, but yeah, if anyone wants to add anything at some point, that's also okay. I'll leave it open for like a day or two, and then we can vote. Um, okay. Also, before we end, oh wait, I'm gonna stop streaming really fast. For anyone who's watching, thanks. Oh my gosh! Whoa! There's all these comments. Yo, I always say this like, oh, I'm gonna read the comments. Oh, I didn't. Oh shit, I didn't read them. Okay. I'm just gonna go through these really fast. There are multiple ethnicities in Rojava, and Kurds are multi-ethnic. Azula Ashlan book was written while he was in prison. Oh shit. We should be understanding the practical governance of Rojava. This sounds like a book written by CIA. What? I find it odd Kurdish leftists are talking specifically about Syria and Turkey when any materialist analysis acknowledges history of British and US imperialism. Okay, Rojava is a Kurdish name, but there's a lot. There's like a whole conversation. I did not read the. I did not
Looks
read.
good.
I am so.
Good stuff.
I'm like just so used to like there not being any comments, and so I'm just like, oh, like I need to be
Yeah.
better about that. But I'm really glad people did comment and were engaged. I'll be better about that next time. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching. If there is anyone still here, oh, there are people here. Oh my gosh, hi. Sorry, I just. Okay, anyways, all right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good day.